Hi everyone, and welcome to today's Socialist Workers' Party Facebook Live meeting, Lockdown to Liberation, Women and Coronavirus. My name is Lorna McKinnon. I'm a member of the Socialist Workers' Party up in Glasgow, or down in Glasgow, depending on where you're watching this from in the world. I'm going to be chairing the meeting today and introducing our speakers who are going to be getting us started shortly. Before they kick us off, just a couple of announcements. Firstly, you can comment throughout the meeting in the Facebook comments below. Especially want to encourage questions for the speakers because we're going to be having a couple of rounds of questions, so do keep them coming in. We want to hear from the fantastic panel that we've got lined up, but we just as much want to hear from you at home as well, so keep those questions coming in. The second thing, of course, is, please do share the stream widely so we can reach as many people as possible. You can also tweet the stream at the hashtag Health Before Profit. Some of our speakers, I'll say now, are also authors of books which are available to order from Bookmarks Bookshop, which is still open and doing deliveries. So I'm just going to explain quickly how the meeting's going to work, and I'm going to introduce our three speakers before we bring the first one in. We're going to hear today from Sarah Bates, socialist worker, journalist. Sarah's written a lot as well on the coronavirus and women as well, and you can find some of her articles online or on our website. We also have Judy Cox joining us today, teacher in East London and the author of the book, The Women's Revolution. And we're very happy to have Selma Oumari as well joining us today. Selma's a French activist with the new Anti-capitalist party. So it's a brilliant panel of speakers we've got for you today. All the speakers are going to in turn speak for a bit, and then we'll move on to our first round of questions. We'll be having 2 rounds of questions though, so once again, just do keep them coming in, posting in the comment section. So without further ado, Sarah, you can kick us off today. Over to you.
Brilliant, thanks, Lorna. So our lives have completely transformed in the last month or so, hasn't they? Life under lockdown, I think, has helped highlight a bit how we live our lives and how parts of our society are structured. Coronavirus has produced a situation, I think, where existing inequalities and oppressions are exacerbated. And for working class people, and working class women in particular, their lives have got much harder. One thing that's come from this crisis is that it's exposed how much working class women do in everyday life, because the vast majority of care in society, paid or unpaid, is undertaken by working class women, and their labour is really critical to keeping society ticking along. For instance, I mean, just look at who is filling the supermarket shelves, or who is uploading the online lessons, or staffing the COVID-19 wards, or working in care homes. These people are overwhelmingly women. And it's an irony that these industries are often kind of patronisingly dismissed as women's work, but now they're seen as absolutely crucial to society. But even this experience of women workers is one shaped by women's oppression. For instance, there's reports from frontline health workers that their personal protective equipment, their PPE, doesn't fit properly, and it's putting their lives at risk, or even more at risk as a result. Why is this? Because the PPE is designed for men, despite the fact that at least 75% of NHS workers are women. You're hearing reports from these health workers that, women workers are actually failing tests, that their masks, are supposed to fit correctly. So they simply just don't have the same level of critical protection. But outside the workplace, outside the care homes, the supermarkets and so on, most caring society falls on women's shoulders. The Young Women's Trust released a study earlier this year that said that just the housework performed by women in Britain is worth at least £140 billion every year. That's more than the £132 billion a year generated by the financial sector. But we hear countless headlines, don't we, worrying about how the city is going to cope with the pandemic, and talk of bailing out the banks again. Yet there's no discussion about how working class families, and women in particular within these families, can deal with the added burden that is heaped on them by this crisis. And of course, it's a situation heightened by a decade of austerity. You know, the Tories smashing apart large part of public services that make life bearable, more bearable. Some people argue that actually in some ways it makes sense for women to do all this work, that we're somehow naturally good at multitasking, our brains work that way, or maybe we're biologically attuned to kind of being more caring and maternal towards other people. Or some people argue that it's the lifelong process of socialisation into gender roles that actually makes it impossible for people to break out of those roles. But if that were true, if we really were biologically attuned to fill these certain roles, child rearing would have always been the preserve of women throughout history. But we have a different theory. Marxists use materialist explanations to understand women's oppression, and we look at the development of human societies and look at how human behaviour and ideas have changed as a result of development within societies. And women's oppression, like any other kind of prejudice or bigotry, is not an inevitable feature of human society. And we can see this by looking at societies in the past, because up until around 10,000 years ago, humans lived differently. Labour was performed collectively inside small groups of people, and small family units, similar to the ones that we might recognise today. These only developed after society reached a particular point in its productive capacity and split into classes. The Marxist Engels called this the world historic defeat of the female sex, because for the first time, women were confined more to child rearing, and their labour was assigned less status within society. Now, the myths around women's, their brains, their behaviour, the myths around women's role of being nurturing caretakers, this actually flowed from this dynamic, not the other way around. Of course, now our lives, they look wildly different, don't they? Look very different to our ancestors 10,000 years ago. But the family unit within that class society performed much the same function as it does today. For instance, lockdown means that all parents are expected to take care of their children now 24/7. There's almost no resistance or even discussion around the idea that parents who are holding down their own jobs often, don't have the material or the emotional capacity to be able to provide unlimited care and attention to children. Now, this responsibility, this homeschooling and so on, this falls more to mothers than to fathers. Why is this? It's partly because of how the world of work is organised. When couples have children, women are more likely to go into part-time, insecure and badly paid work as a result. Even maternity and paternity benefits are allocated, organised on the basis that women will simply do more parenting than men. And unequal pay means men are more likely to receive a higher wage than women. So it actually makes sense for men to stay in full-time work and for women to take on more of these responsibilities for a lot of families. So when it comes to the crunch, whether that crunch is a global pandemic or whether the child is ill, this responsibility, this care is shouldered by women, not because that's how their brains are wired, but because that's how work and their families are organised as a result. I think it's important just to say that the family is so critical, the unit of the family is so important. It's not simply just a byproduct of class society, but it actually plays a critical role in maintaining capitalism. And it does this both economically and ideologically. In the first instance, bosses rely actually on this unpaid labour that I talked about, these billions and billions of pounds that women do. They rely on the unpaid labour of parents in raising the next generation of workers who, when these children come into adulthood, they're healthy, they're socialised, they're educated enough to be productive workers. And secondly, because these caregiving responsibilities act as a central justification for women's oppression. In fact, the family is so pervasive, it impacts on society as a whole, regardless of how you as an individual choose to live your life. So you don't get to escape sexist stereotypes about what women and what people are supposed to be like. Even if you're not a mother or you're not a parent, because these ideas are pushed so forcefully from the top of society. Women are paid less than men, whether they have children or not. This can partly be explained by old-fashioned sexism, bosses simply not picking women for promotion or for overtime and things like that. But like I said, a key factor is how these types of jobs that women go into are dismissed as women's work and are shaped by women's caregiving roles in society. But jobs like, nursing people in a COVID-19 ward or organising food distribution, these aren't a natural extension of our womanhood. It takes real skill and experience to perform these roles, and they are a really critical role in society. But I think the ideological role of the perfect family plays a really important role in society. We hear all the time, don't we, politicians espousing this idea of hard-working families. But, the Tories' austerity programme, benefit cuts and privatisation of public sector actually undermine the support that working class, families need. And actually, in reality, for some people, for a lot of people, families are not this happy and harmonious ideal that is projected onto us. They are the family home is the place where people are most likely to experience neglect, abuse, or violence. And the pressure of lockdown, the pressure of coronavirus will intensify or is intensifying intimate partner violence and the services that support people. However, for the most part, our families are actually places where we do experience love and support a lot of the time. Nobody says or feels like they want to have a baby so they can reproduce the next generation of workers. That's not how it feels, is it? They want to have children because it's an expression of support, isn't it? And love and connection in what often is a very cruel and difficult world. But just finally, I just want to say that I think it's important that we acknowledge as well that there's no kind of universal experience of womanhood. There's no one way to live as a woman under capitalism. That's true, but that's true in lockdown, but it's also true of living in the system more broadly. And I think that's why we need to look at why experiences of women are the same, but also how they're different, because self-isolation for an ASDA worker on a 0 hours contract or a CEO who's sort of working from a home office, actually those self-isolation experiences are going to be wildly different. So I think we need to understand the role that class plays in oppression, and use that understanding to help us to understand the unique experience of women, but use that to arm us in the struggles to come. Because part of what we need to do now, part of the fight now, is raising demands that ease some of the burden that are pushed on working class women through the ideological construct and the material reality of the nuclear family. These can include fighting for childcare support, emergency food parcels, proper PPE, and support for domestic violence services, amongst lots of other things. But I think it also means analysing the material reality of capitalist society, looking under the bonnet, as it were, and not just looking at the outward appearance of things. And I think ultimately it means fighting for an alternative socialist system where production and the reproduction of human life is organised in the interests of ordinary people and not organised in the interests of bosses.
Brilliant. Thanks very much, Sarah, for that introduction. We're going to move to our second speaker, Selma Oumari. I'm just going to say for folk that might have joined us more recently, Selma is an activist for the new Anti-Capitalist Party. So Selma, whenever you're ready, over to you.
Okay. Thank you for the invitation. First, I would like to, well, what Sarah's just said is quite right, that the lockdown has exaggerated sexism, but at the same time, I would like to give few examples in which you can see that when people organize, women organize, and organize solidarity, it is possible to offer alternative solutions on the coronavirus crisis and the lockdown in which we are. But before that, I would like to assess the fact that there's been a big social movements before the lockdown happened, and that those social movements are still trying to organize themselves despite this lockdown and the isolation of the people. So those movements were, there was a huge pensions movement against Macron's reform, neoliberal reform, in which women played a key role, in which feminist movements were at the center, because women were the ones who could be hit, who are hit more economically than men if the pension reform passed. The other thing is that the last demonstration before the lockdown started was on the 8th March, and it was a huge demonstration in France. 10,000 of people, even more, were on the streets and very present. And the day before, there was also a big demonstration by women that has been under huge police repression. So you have all this conflicted situation in which women were playing an important role, and this movement is still happening, but in other forms. The other point is that also on the hospital sector was very much on strike before the lockdown happened. There were hospital staff collectives in which women were also very much involved in it, and are still in and still communicating about that. So you have all this context before the lockdown happened: big demonstrations, strikes, discontent in the hospital. So since the lockdown happened, then you had also demonstration from the hospital staff, women demonstrating, for example, when Macron came to visit a hospital. So there were also protests from the staff. The hospital staff has about more than 70% of women working in it. So it's one of the biggest section in which women are working. So even what you said, Sarah, before is not very different from France to the UK, because the same social structure exists. So you have all these protests going on. You also had the fact that the trade union are playing a key role on that. And so since the lockdown happened, you have all the essential sectors still working on, like care, like food and hospital. So all those sectors in which trade unions also are playing a role into giving rights for women for better protection, using what we call in France the right to retreat, which is the right for every worker to not work if the security conditions are not there. And at the beginning of the lockdown, also we've been there was sad news also from people who died, and especially women. An Algerian, not an Algerian, sorry, but Aisha Issadouden was working in a supermarket in the neighborhood, in the hood of Saint-Denis, which is northern Paris, and she died like few days after the lockdown, which means that she got it by going to work, continuing to go to work despite in the absence of safety, of sanitary disposition to protect these workers, or like she did. So So there were lots of also rage at that, because also Black women, Arab women are very much exposed to this kind in this kind of labors, and she is one of those who died because of the lack of safety from her bosses, but at the same time the undermining of the sickness by the state. So you have also a dramatic situation in which working means for those people more risks of getting sick and die, and you also have an increase in domestic abuse. Like more than 30% of women are victims of, well, are calling, not victims, because victims are even more than people who call, but there were many complaints. And at the same time also the family planning has registered more than an increase in 50% of the calls for late abortions. So how do feminist movement respond to that? Is by doing some online campaigning, but also mediatic pressure over deputies, politicians, etc. Trying to open new services for women's care, trying to find out how women who are under threat could be sheltered, put in security, and also trying to raise awareness around, for example, you're living in a neighborhood and you're hearing cries or people screaming and stuff like that. How do you react? How do you respond to that? So there are some online training on to respond to those situations. So there's been also like online grouping, online organizing around tackling sexist violence in the neighborhoods. And some of these campaigns received few gains, trying to for example, on the abortion issue, on the late abortion issue, they managed to obtain longer delays than we have in France. In France, it's much lower than other countries in Europe. So they managed to get like extra 2 weeks for women's possibility to access to abortion, and so it gave also confidence to move forward to that. There's been also lots of I would say humanitarian work, but humanitarian work in the coronavirus context has also a strong political meaning. For example, I can cite one of our comrades. He's very active in transgender solidarity, and is trying to provide food for trans workers who had to stop. So some of them are sex workers, for example, so they are particularly exposed to the virus and have no other choice and are left with no money. So there is a campaign also to pressure for them to get a basic income, and at the same time trying to respond to have a specific answer on sanitary how to give sanitary products, food, the basic thing, but also trying to make a connection. It's not just humanitarian groups who come and save, it's also the self-activity of the trans women who manage to organize solidarity between themselves. Many of them also are undocumented, and so many of them also don't speak French. So you have all this connection can only be done, and needs can only be answered by the ones who knows what it means to be a trans woman, but also an undocumented woman who's left with nothing at the end of the month. So there are emergency, but there are also solidarity that is built around this. And this is continuing despite the lockdown. It is getting worse, but at the same time there is solidarity that help people to be better organized. I think I've been a bit too long. I'll just finish on this. So schools are reopening. They are trying to reopen kindergartens to say that like using the argument that parents are taking care of their children all day long, that this is increasing social inequality, etc. Okay, but the problem is that the sanitary conditions are very problematic, and also that most of the people who also care of the kids in schools are women. Like 83% of the person who keep your children all day long and is teaching your children all day long are women at the same time. So you're just transferring the problem, but making it even worse for safety reasons. And I think this also should be raised and can't be resolved fully under the capitalist system, because we need to rely more on this capacity of people to self-organize. Like the conditions of the lockdown are very paternalistic. You have to stay home. You're like in home arrest. You can't let the children get connected into each other. You can't organize local groups really, because you are not allowed, unless you get arrested for that. So we can provide solutions. We can provide alternative solutions that can't be solved only by saying stay home or put your kids at school and let them and let them be taken care of in horrible conditions. I think other solution can be raised, and also it can only we need women to do that, because the crisis has highlighted the fact that women are playing an essential role in society and shouldn't be underpaid or being undervalued, or be saying that this is free labor. This is not free labor. When seamstresses are making masks, it's not free labor. It's a labor that has to be recognized as essential, more essential than other lucrative capitalist activities. And this is why we should rely on women's ability to organize and resist about that. And just to end with the last example, like you have seamstresses who started to organize and say that we are not free labor and that our work is essential. So they are organizing very widely, and this is an interesting situation in which we could support and follow. And I think next is to come. Thanks.
Nice one, Selma. That was great. Thanks so much. We're going to move to the last speaker now for this wee section, Judy Cox. I'll say again, Judy's a teacher in East London and author of the book, The Women's Revolution. So, Judy, I pass you the virtual microphone.
Thank you. And I just wanted to say to Selma how brilliantly she speaks in a language which isn't her first language, and how I wish I had that same kind of ability to speak in another language. And I wanted to pick up on the theme that Selma started with, which I think is resistance to oppression, because wherever there is oppression, there is resistance. And to talk about that, I want to talk about three things. Just three things, but three quite big things: the past, the present, and the future, in under 10 minutes. So what could go wrong? So starting with the past. During lockdown, I've been researching small biographies of hundreds of women of the working class movement and the socialist movement and the anti-racist movement, hundreds of women who inspired thousands more women to stand up and resist oppression. These are women who spoke out when they were supposed to be silent, who stood out boldly when they were supposed to be cowering and meek, women who refused to be confined physically or mentally to the hearth and the kitchen, and reached beyond their individual interests to forge a collective resistance against what the system was doing to them. They looked beyond habit, they looked beyond fear of consequences, fear of ridicule, to action and to hope, and to beginning to act against the system. These are women who campaigned, who petitioned, who went on strike, who rioted, who risked their health and their wealth, not just to advance themselves as individuals, but to fight for change on behalf of themselves and others. Many of these are women who began fighting for legal equality, political equality, formal equality, but then realised that if you are a working class woman, equality with a working class man who is also downtrodden, badly paid, working insecure, etc., is not really the most that you can hope for out of the system. Yes, we want equality, but we want real liberation. We want real change. How did we bring slavery to an end? We did it through mass campaigns and slave rebellions in which women took the lead. How did we win the right to vote? Through mass campaigns, through strikes, through militant direct action in which women took the lead. How did we win the right to control our own bodies, to have contraception, to have access to abortion, to challenge sexual harassment, to challenge domestic violence by constant and vigilant campaigning by both men and women? So the women of the past blazed a trail and bequeathed to us a rich tradition of how collective action against the system can see people challenging their old sexist ideas, challenging the habits of the past, and creating a space for women to lead and to explore the full potential of those struggles. Today, let's come to the present. Where are those insurgent women today? It is 1 year ago since a young woman got onto a car roof in the Sudanese city of Khartoum and started singing revolutionary songs to inspire the crowd to rise up against their corrupt and unjust government. Before that, we saw women on the streets in Lebanon taking part in a mass movement in which one woman interviewed said, "We've always had this much energy. It's just that this struggle has given us the chance to unleash that energy and to find out who we really are." We saw women taking the lead in huge movements in Chile under the slogan, "Nunca más sin nosotros," nothing more without us, nothing more without us women. We saw in India women taking the lead in the struggles against Modi's racist laws against Muslims, when an Indian activist called Medha Potka said to a journalist, "They think us women are shields around the family, but we are swords, sharp swords in the struggle against injustice." Where are those women today? Those insurgent, rebellious women? They're probably at home trying to plan lessons while homeschooling 3 children and preparing dinner. They're driving ambulances, they're working in Tesco's, they're cleaning the hospitals, they're working in care homes. These are the women who are beginning to say, it's not enough to clap for the NHS or ask where is our PPE or why we haven't got masks and why we can't be safe at work. They're the women who are beginning to protest, and by beginning to protest, beginning to raise questions about the priorities of the system we live in. The great anti-capitalist writer and novelist Arundhati Roy has said that historically, pandemics are portals onto another world. So the question is, do we go through to that world dragging the weight of dead ideas, of racism, of sexism, of inequality and humiliation? Do we go dragging the dead rivers, the dead seas and the dead air behind us? Or do we tread through the portal lightly, imagining a new world and preparing to fight for that world? Because we don't want to go back to normal. If normal is a world of sexism, of commodification of the human body, where women are undervalued, where women can be used and thrown aside, where women are systematically oppressed in our society. We don't want to go back to the capitalist death machine. We want to wrest power from a system which risks our very annihilation through pandemic, through war, through climate change, through economic crisis. And when we think about how we can wrest that power, where the power in society lies, it lies in our hands. It lies in the hands of the garment worker in Bangladesh, the bus driver in London, the woman who's delivering the Amazon parcels. We want democratic control, not just of who represents us in Parliament, but over every single aspect of our lives. Who should run our hospitals, if not the nurses, the doctors, the cleaners and the patients? How much better would our schools be if they were run not by penny pinching, budget holding bureaucrats who are all obsessed with performance related pay? How much better would they be if they were run by the teachers, the teaching assistants, the parents and the children themselves? Who better to distribute the goods that we need around the world than the workers of Amazon? when you think not only about democracy, but the vast economic resources we have at our disposal, then those are resources which we could begin to use to meet human need. Not only immediately taking over the wealth of Bezos from Amazon or Bill Gates or whoever these huge multimillionaires are, but in the future beginning to plan how we can use our resources in harmony with the natural world and to meet all of our needs, to liberate women from the drudgery of housework, so that cooking could be a hobby and not a daily chore, so that children could be looked after collectively, so that old people could be cared for in the way that they deserve. And so when we're thinking about that new world that we might be able to build when we've gone through the portal of coronavirus, then we need to say no socialism without women's liberation and no women's liberation without socialism.
Nice one. Thanks so much, Judy. That was brilliant. What a great start. I'll say just now that there's around 350 people tuning in live across Facebook, YouTube and Twitter right now. And that's amazing. So do keep sharing. Just to make it clear once more to the viewers, we're going to have 2 rounds of questions. Many thanks to everyone that's written in so far. I'm going to read out a few questions now, but once again, we want to keep hearing from you. So do keep the questions coming in. What we've done is picked out 3 questions that kind of sum up the main arguments and ideas that have been coming out of the comments section so far. So I'm just going to rattle through them just now, and I'll read them out in succession, and then we'll go back to the speakers and they'll get the opportunity to respond. So the first question is from Isabel. She asks, we're told to stay safe by staying at home, but we know that the home is unsafe for many women. How can we fight to ensure that women can stay safe from the virus as well as from other harms they may face in the home? The second question is from Liz. The care sector has huge numbers of women working in it, usually in low-paid jobs with long hours. When we say things can't go back to how they were before, what's the best way to make sure these women workers are properly valued and properly paid? And the third question, the last question, is from Erica. She asks, how can we prevent the stereotypes of women as caregivers and their main role being in the family? So if it's okay with the speakers, we're going to jumble the order a wee bit now, starting with Selma this time. If you want to get us started, Selma, then whenever you're ready, take it away.
Yep. About the first question, well, I can only talk about the situation in France, but I think I've said it in my talk, that feminist groups are organizing online, that they are also giving advice, giving numbers. They've compiled, for example, all the numbers you can call when you witness or when someone witnesses sexist violence. They try also to make like clips with personalities talking directly to women, like women talking to women, famous women talking to women, or and saying and trying to give them confidence to do that. So you have those kind of campaigns happening, and yes, there must be some local feminist group existing, or groups that are specialized on tackling sexist violence. So you have also there are also those things, or you can set up your own, if maybe it already exists, but your own group of people in the neighborhood, feminist group in the neighborhood, trying to take care of each other. This is something that I've seen in Facebook, for example, just in my home neighborhood, or even in Paris. You have these kind of groups that can shelter women, or giving support, or giving free psychological support, but also towards LGBT, towards children, towards gay children that didn't come out, for example. You have also such situations. And the other elements, I think we are all, well, it's my case also, undertrained around our ability to identify sexist abuse from the outside, because they can also be psychological, not only explicit. And so there are some trainings exist, or if it doesn't exist, I should encourage you to find a way to open training. So I think things it's possible, but it means that you need to relate to other groups, or finding feminist groups trying to organize. On the second point about the care sector, all I can say is that we have to support the existing movement, or supporting these women's staff, but not so. I think there is a necessity during the situation, not at the end of the lockdown, to give economic support for the hospital in general. But it's right that we need to have also a specific campaign around women's being underpaid, and as well as migrants also. Many of them died from the coronavirus and are still underpaid. So all those elements of mistreatment, underpaying of these staff needs to be addressed specifically within a global campaign to support the hospital. That's the only way I think that could really help them to respond to this specific demand because of this specific different treatment. For example, during the pensions movement, women really organized themselves also as women during the demonstration to highlight women's situation. So specific campaign is important. On the third matter, I think it's a very complicated question, but it's a good question: how to prevent the stereotypes of women as caregivers. I think it's maybe the other speakers we will develop on the matter, but if there is a stereotype, it means that also these works are undervalued, and that we need more caregivers in society than what we have, and that they should be better paid, like Liz said on the second question. And at the same time, it means also trying to stop the division of labor as it is. So it means also another way to organize society. Like, the thing is that you can't blame women for doing women's job. I think it's not your question, what you've been saying, but the fact is that most of women are there, and we should value them for what they are. And at the same time, there is the question of, if you value better, then not only women will do it, everybody will do it, every genders will do it. If you make it as a central element of how society should be working, it means that there will be more people in it working on it. But I don't have a fixed question, but the question is good, and we should still continue to think about it. Thank you.
Nice one, thanks, Selma. And we're going to move to Sarah Bates now. So Sarah, over to you.
Yeah, on the question about making sure people are safe at home, I think, if you look at how support services have been accessed over the past few weeks, it's horrifying, but it's no real surprise to me that some charities are reporting 120% increase in the amount of people ringing their helplines, and some are reporting a tripling of access to their websites. I think, first of all, we need to place this in the context of huge cuts to the sorts of services that help, help victims of domestic violence. I think the Tories have pledged something like £2 billion to facilitate services during the lockdown. Not only is that not enough, it comes in the context of over a decade of cutting those services, closing down refuges that are an emergency service. So it's absolutely not true that these people in the cabinet care about the fate of working class people, working class women in the home who are suffering from violence. I mean, in terms of how we make people safe, again, it is quite a complicated answer to try and get across in a few minutes, but people come under enormous stress and strain during capitalism, in capitalist life. Often the only place they feel like they're able to kind of express that and horrifically take it out on those around them. I think if we look at the family, it's seen as a completely private sphere that is completely isolated from everywhere else, where the problems are supposed to be sort of kept in the family, aren't they? You know, even the term kind of domestic dispute it kind of implies that it's a private issue. This is reflected in the way that authorities treat things like domestic violence as simply something that is a private matter, not to be kind of really interfered with. And you can see that in the way they treat people who report it. I think just on the second question, just about care work, I think it's a really good question. The situation facing care workers and indeed service users of lots of care services is quite bleak. Something like 88% of care workers are women. Two in three care workers in the private sector are paid below the real living wage. It is a highly privatised, poorly paid, insecure industry for workers. I think part of the answer lies in something like the care workers in Birmingham, who in 2018 and 2019 staged a series of impressive strikes against a Labour-run council that wanted to split their shifts up and not pay them, so effectively forcing low-paid women workers to work for around 5 hours for free every single day. This was I think at the beginning they were a largely ununionised workforce that were lone workers. They struck over a period of 18 months and they won their dispute. But I think the second part of the answer lies in the nature of how the care system is in Britain. It is a highly privatised industry where the care of vulnerable people is left to bosses who take on contracts to provide care, hoping to cream off the maximum level of profits. It's one where there's thousands of different care providers that produces problems in the day-to-day running of the care system, but even so more when there's something like the coronavirus outbreak. Really the system starts to completely fall apart. Care managers aren't able to get hold of the PPE that people need because they don't have access to it in the same way that local government providers or NHS services do. It also makes it harder to implement key safety key safety procedures that keep residents and service users and workers safe. But I think ultimately it's about creating a service that is run on the basis of what is useful for human need rather than profit, which is the absolutely opposite of how the care system is run at the moment. And I think the answer to that lies in the action of workers like the women in Birmingham who, they were picked on, strikers told me, because the council leaders thought they were an easy target, and they proved not to be an easy target because they fought for years and they won in the end. So I think it's through workers' action that we can win on these questions and ensure that there is no return to normal.
Cheers, Sarah. Thank you. Judy, you're going to finish off this section, so over to you, Judy.
Thank you. Isabel's question, to answer all the questions really, I think coronavirus has been like an X-ray on capitalism and has shown the skeleton which exists beneath the kind of surface appearance of equality and freedom and all those kind of ideas. And so in the first question, the X-ray has really shown up whose work is valuable and whose is not. And inside the home, which is supposed to be our haven from the world, can also be for many people a hell. And for some of us, it can be a bit of both at different times. The home is where we want love, where we seek refuge, where we try to create a little island of our own that reflects ourselves and our own interests, where we give our children love, and hopefully occasionally they love us back. But it's also for many people a hell. And now everybody's talking about domestic violence. The Tories cut 8 million from the domestic violence budget over the last few years. And when Priti Patel gets up and announces some paltry package back, which doesn't cover what they cost, you know, Priti Patel is herself a living embodiment of the fact that the unity that might be amongst the oppressed is totally cut through by class and by politics. And so we can point to those things. And as Sarah said, point to things that can help women's situation in the home. But we have to ask something a bit deeper, which is, why do we live in a world where some men, not many men, but some men, think they can take their frustrations out on women and children as if they own them? Why do people stay in terrible relationships which don't nurture them, but drain their energy and even put them in violence, into the threat of violence? And that is alienation. That is not about human nature. That is something that society does to us, where it creates a whole set of expectations and then deprives us of all means of fulfilling them. And that's why the home, under any circumstances, and particularly under coronavirus, can be such a pressure cooker. The second question, the X-ray has shown up who really matters in society, because what job could be more important than holding the hand of somebody dying alone and reading out the letters from their family, which is what care workers are doing? What job could be more important than that? And so when we get back, we have to say, for care workers and Tesco's workers and all those low-paid women workers, you clapped for us, you patronised us and told us how important we were. Now pay us. Now give us the right to organise. Now give us some freedom at work to decide our own holidays. And don't forget that in the past, many great upsurges of working class struggle have been sparked not by the trade union, well-organised male traditional workers, but by the match women, the care home workers of the day. So that's something we can hope for. Third question, the X-ray has completely exposed that myth of equality, the stereotypes that women are caregivers, therefore women are teachers and nurses and cleaners. And because women are nurturers and teachers and cleaners, women, the stereotype is fulfilled. I want to be a good mom and a good daughter to my parents. And I don't mind if people think I'm nice, so long as they understand that I am also powerful, that I am autonomous, that I don't merely exist to serve other people in the family or in the workplace, that I am a powerful person, that I can claim my equality, but I want more than equality with the men of my class. I want to overthrow the stereotypes and I want real liberation. And now more women than ever work outside of the home and are challenging those stereotypes through power, through collective class organisation.
Thank you, Judy. That was great. Thanks to all the speakers. That was a really great first round of questions. We're going to move on to our second round of questions now. I'm going to start though with a comment from Joy. Joy says, all women should not go back to work when mandated as a protest. For them to realise how women are essential to the workforce and in low paid work. It can be done, but at the end of this. I'm going to go to the questions now. So question number 1 is from Jan. Jan asks, some women are arguing that the virus has been handled better in Scandinavia because they have more women politicians. So would it be better if we had a woman instead of Matt Hancock? Was that question 1? That was question 1. Question 2 is from Emma. The COVID crisis has highlighted the centrality of women workers while also increasing pressure on women in the home. How can we ensure that women's demands for decent pay and conditions is part of our demands around no going back and no return to normal in response to the COVID crisis? And question 3 is from Francesca. It has been suggested that women are more likely to support left-wing politics. For example, more women than men were shown to support Corbyn. What could be the explanation for this? So hopefully all our speakers have got those questions noted down. We're going to reverse the order again, just to keep the speakers on their toes. And we're going to start with Judy this time. So over to you, Judy.
Desperately scribbling answers here. Okay, on Jan's question, would a woman be better than Matt Hancock? I actually think a hamster would be better than Matt Hancock at the moment. More or less any living sentient being would be better than Matt Hancock, because it would be very, very, very hard to think of anybody more duplicitous and incompetent and more seeking after his own reputation at the expense of all else. The argument about Scandinavia, I think, is interesting, except it is undercut by Sweden, who have refused to go into lockdown and are seeing death rates rocket in Sweden. And they are saying that, you know, they've played politics with the lives of people in the care homes who are dying disproportionately. I think the argument that lies behind that are women kind of more kind and generally more gentle and more sensible. Not really, are they? I mean, it would be nice to think so, but I think, and it brings me on to Francesca's question, that women can support fascist movements. You can have right-wing women, you can have conservative women. It is about class and it is about politics. I think for us who want to see a change in a different world after the coronavirus, who want to go through the portal treading lightly, imagining and fighting for a different future, it's about how we show women and men that socialism can offer a viable alternative, that protesting can build confidence, can reveal truths about the system, but ultimately it depends on people being able to draw on a rich and radical tradition of working class and women's struggles in order to signpost a way to the future, which I suppose answers a bit Emma's question. How can we make sure that women workers who are struggling on the front line and with the lockdown, suffering a double burden, when we go back, that our demands are central? We have to make sure they are. I mean, I don't think there's a huge argument that women as teachers, women as caregivers should somehow be marginalised from the process. There are subtle ways in which women in the majority of a workforce can still not be represented in trade unions who represent that workforce equally. We have to fight to make sure that women's voices and socialist women's voices are those that shape any future society that we manage to build when we get out of lockdown.
Absolutely, Judy. Thanks so much. Right, we're going to move on to Selma now. So Selma, whenever you're ready, take it away.
Yeah. I love Jan's questions because it's a really challenging one, and it's a funny one. That UK, in my memory, is a country that had a prime minister who was a woman, who was the main neoliberal architect of the country, Margaret Thatcher. So I think it's the one of the most beautiful counterexample that shows that when women are politicians, the situation is not better. It can also be worse because it's a matter of a system rather than a matter of individuals. And just to give you the example of France, the previous health minister was a woman, Agnès Buzyn. And when the coronavirus started, she was she was among the ones who completely undermined it, saying that, well, there are only few cases, it's not a big issue. So nothing has been prepared to answer to that crisis. And our current adversary is called Muriel Pénicaud. Again, a woman. She's the Labour minister, and she's among the ones who are breaking labor laws, labor rights, and trying to push more and more workers back to work. So I think it's more. It's not just a matter of having just a woman popping up and saying that everything would be handled better. The truth is that there is an inequality between countries in the way that this crisis is treated, but it's also, I think, linked to the balance of forces, of class forces, general class forces in your country. That explains why France has entered to lockdown earlier than in the UK. It's a result. It's also a result as the social existing pressure. So yes, that brings me to the other question, which is women supporting left-wing politics. Then again, it's a matter of I think why are women more into left-wing politics? Maybe it's because left-wing politics is around the self-organization of the people, of more common, more putting ideas in common, more uniting forces among the poorer, and among the poorer there are lots of women, and at the same time they are the one who can be attracted to more social equality as member of the working class, and also in the way people get organized. So it's much more a matter of, it's not a question of just supporting one person or thinking that one person can change the whole system. It's more about campaigning, organizing collectively, but also highlighting the women's role in the way you organize yourself. And the truth is that women are at the other side, because when you see how the elite or the ruling class is organized, or what is the majority of people who are bringing decision, it's mostly men. So you can have a woman here and there, but or just put it at the front to say, look, we are feminists. But the truth is that most of the people who decide are men. So we are at the other side, and our ratio of women and men is more egalitarian than what the system is organized around ruling class values that are not that much changing, in fact. On the second question, how it has highlighted the centrality of women workers. Yes, I think this is one of the points we've all agreed on, and I think we should raise more and more awareness on that, and support the existing. It can only start from the existing activity of the workers and the women workers, and then trying to push forward and support those initiatives. So we have to be, I think, more aware about the resistance that are happening around us, and trying to support them, but also bring specific demands within these general movements. But it can only be done within the general movement, but also with pushing forward those specific demands for better pays and better working conditions. Well, okay.
Thanks again, Selma. All right, Sarah, you're going to close this section, so over to you.
Okay, thanks, Lorna. Just on the question of would it be better if we had women instead of Matt Hancock, etc. I mean, this was very much an argument taken up by, I think it was Amber Rudd last month, who, launched quite a high-profile attack against the amount of women that were in the room. I think it was the Cobra meetings, she said we need more women to sit in the room because we need that kind of experience and so on. I mean, I think we have to be clear, like Amber Rudd, she's not someone who fights oppression. This is someone who has presided over, she was in the Home Office when the Windrush scandal broke, the mass deportation, of people. And I think we have to be careful about the level of significance that is attached to kind of more women being in decision-making rooms. You know, I don't cheer when I see an all-male cabinet, but neither really do I think it's particularly progressive that Amber Rudd might sit on it. I don't think that's a step forward. I mean, Rudd is someone who followed, of course, Theresa May, you know, the architect of the hostile environment, someone who wore T-shirts saying this is what a feminist looks like, while cutting domestic violence services. This is a completely paper-thin attitude towards women's liberation. It's, you know, it's buzzwords, and it's kind of fitting in with this idea about, you know, this is how you fight oppression or whatever, just by being in the room and wearing the right T-shirt, while completely attacking and undermining the material conditions that actually mean whether working class women live or die. I think we have to be completely clear that there is, you know, there's no automatic unity of the oppressed. Neither Rudd nor May cared about the fate of the people that they sent to the Caribbean, whether they were men or women. Even though Rudd and May are women, and they do suffer from women's oppression, I think we have to be absolutely clear that they are fighters for their class first and foremost. And I think this informs what we do, because I think we also have to be class fighters at the heart of everything we do. And we've talked a bit in the meeting about how class shapes our experience of women's oppression, but of course, if you are a member of the working class, it's not just a sort of another awful thing to happen to us. It's not just about being a bit poor, but it's actually a real source of strength. It's kind of what I think Joy and Emma talked about in their questions, you know, this idea of no going back, because, you know, we've talked about all the work that women have to do, kind of paid and unpaid work, you know, but this isn't just another burden. This isn't just another hassle that we have to kind of put up with. It shows how critical that labour is, that work is, how important working class women are, and the power that they hold within capitalism, because it is action by women organising as workers. You know, that therein, that dynamic, that power, that lies, you know, that's where our power sits for a completely different kind of world, actually, not just no going back to how things were before Corona, but powering forward to a completely different type of society. Because ultimately this fight, it's not just about the position of individuals, but it's about the strength of our class together. Because it is, you know, it's the working class. We're the ones with the power. We're the ones with the potential to build a bit better world. But it does mean fighting for maximum unity within our class, between men and women, as members of the working class, battling against the whole system that divides us. Because ultimately, capitalism, it hasn't even delivered the formal promises, the promises of formal equality, much less the liberation that we deserve. And I think we have to fight the whole system, not just a piecemeal battle about our individual lives, although they are absolutely critical, but it's actually about ripping out the whole system, ripping out class society and replacing it with something better, replacing it with a socialist society and building that together. It requires everyone to be involved. It requires everyone to fight for their class as hard as Amber Rudd and Theresa May are fighting for their class, because it is possible to build a different world, you know, that doesn't have the horrors that capitalism produces, you know, like climate catastrophe, poverty, war. It's one where working class people live with sort of daily humiliation and being belittled by the system and oppressed. And really, I suppose I'd end on a question, because if you're not a revolutionary socialist, why not? You should be. You should want, and you deserve a better world than the one we have now. And you should join the Socialist Workers' Party. You should join us in fighting for a better world. That's it.
So thanks so much for that, Sarah, and to Selma and Judy as well. That was an absolutely brilliant meeting. I totally enjoyed it. That is all we've got time for today. So I want to say a massive thanks once more to all the speakers and to everyone that's tuned in and posted questions and comments in the comment section. I'm going to leave you though with a couple of announcements. You can always reach us on the hashtag Health Before Profit. This meeting as well is going to be posted on Facebook and Twitter and YouTube if you want to, pass it on to someone you know, or share it or watch it again. That is an option for you. And as I said earlier, some of the speakers are authors of books which you can access and order from Bookmarks Bookshop at www.bookmarksbookshop.co.uk. And it's worth saying, like, of course, small businesses, including bookshops, particularly independent socialist bookshops like Bookmarks, are going to be struggling a bit at this time. So this is a really brilliant way that you can support them, but also find out more about some of the ideas that we've been discussing today. So go online and check out the website and, treat yourself, get some books or make a wee donation. The second thing I want to announce is next week's Facebook Live meeting as well. It's a very, very special one called Race, Class and the Coronavirus. We're delighted to have Michael Brown joining us next week for that meeting. Michael is a Black Lives Matter activist in the States. And he'll also be joined by an NHS doctor as well that'll be speaking as well. It's going to be fantastic, that meeting, and it's not one to miss. So do tune in for that next Saturday, the 2nd of May at 5 p.m. And the last thing I was going to say is, if you enjoyed the discussion today and you agreed with the ideas and the politics of the discussion, then do think about joining the Socialist Workers' Party. Wherever you are, there will be socialists nearby. There will be socialists in your area holding regular Zoom meetings and organising in your community. So if you're looking to get more involved and you agree with what's been said today, then do think about joining us and being a part of helping to fight for a better world. It really is that simple. And there's a link to join us, which will be posted in the events description for this event. So a final thanks to our speakers, our viewers. Please do keep checking out our Facebook page. We'll be having more meetings like this one on the regular. So, do stay in touch, stay safe and stay socialist. Solidarity, everyone. Cheers.